The sky over New York was gray that autumn afternoon, as if it already sensed the emotional storm on the horizon. Denzel Washington, just 21 years old, held a crumpled script of a classic play in his hands. The paper trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from nerves. This would be the biggest audition of his life so far. A lead role in an experimental production that was expected to draw the attention of major Broadway producers. He arrived early. Way too early. He sat on the theater steps while other actors passed by wearing expensive clothes, radiating confidence, with perfectly practiced smiles. Denzel felt small. A young black man from the Bronx, son of a preacher and a hairdresser. Nothing about his appearance screamed star. But he carried an inner light he didn't yet know how to use. When they called his name, his heart nearly leapt from his chest. Denzel Washington, you're up next. He walked in. The room was lit with cold, white lights. 3 judges sat before him like a ruthless tribunal, a famous director with a bored look, a theater critic with a cynical gaze, and a seasoned actor who seemed to judge him before he even spoke. Denzel took his position, breathed deeply, and began. His eyes filled with emotion. His voice rang out strong, full of real feeling. It was a monologue from The Merchant of Venice, and he gave it everything he had. For 3 minutes, he forgot everything else. It was just him and the soul of the character. Raw truth. Living art. Silence. When he finished, he looked up, hoping for some kind of reaction. Any reaction. The director raised an eyebrow and let out a short, almost mocking laugh. The critic simply jotted something down without looking up and said, "Next." Denzel stood frozen, not understanding. The veteran actor, with a tone of disdain, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You've got charisma, but that doesn't pay for talent. Maybe you'll land a background role if you're lucky." The door opened. Another candidate walked in. Denzel was pushed off the stage by time and by contempt. He walked down the stairs like a man carrying his own coffin. Outside, the city carried on indifferent. Horns honked. People rushed past. But inside Denzel, something had died that day. Or maybe something had just been born. That night, Denzel didn't go straight home. He wandered the wet streets of Manhattan aimlessly, haunted by the echoes of muffled laughter, public humiliation, and the phrase that pounded in his head like a hammer. Maybe you'll land a background role if you're lucky. He slipped into a cheap diner on the corner of 42nd and 9th Avenue, sat alone, ordered a black coffee, and stared into the warped reflection in the window. Outside, the world kept moving, but inside he was at war. You should give up. This isn't for you. Go back to school. Be a teacher. Be anything, just not this. The voice of wounded pride screamed inside him. It would have been easier to accept defeat than to keep facing constant judgment. He thought of his mother, Lennis, who believed in him so deeply. Thought of his father, Denzel Sr., who used to say art didn't put food on the table. And now he was starting to believe that old speech. But something stronger began to rise. A strange feeling. It wasn't anger at the judges. It was a quiet fury at himself for letting strangers decide his worth. They took everything from me with one sentence, and I let them. The next day, still shaken, Denzel went back to the conservatory where he took occasional classes. When he stepped into the rehearsal room, he heard whispers. Some classmates had already heard about the humiliation. One of them, laughing in the back with others, called out, "Hey, Denzel, when's your background role debut?" His blood boiled. Denzel turned around. For the first time, he looked the guy straight in the eye. He said nothing, but his silence was different. It wasn't the silence of shame from the day before. It was a silence full of fire. The teacher, an elderly and wise woman named Mrs. Carrington, noticed the tension and pulled Denzel aside. "You gonna let them decide how your story ends, Washington? I don't know if I'm good enough." She then said a sentence that struck through his soul like lightning. Talent is just the beginning. The rest is war. Later that night, in his tiny Harlem apartment, Denzel locked himself in the bathroom, stood face to face with the mirror, stared into his own eyes for long minutes. Tears rolled down, but he didn't look away. "Enough," he whispered. And again, louder this time, Enough. In that tired, tear-streaked reflection, he saw the man he wanted to become. Not a background extra. Not someone cast aside, but someone unbreakable. An actor. A giant. And that night, he didn't sleep. He rehearsed until sunrise. Because the humiliation had ignited something no one could ever extinguish. The city was waking up slowly. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the windows of the small Harlem apartment. But Denzel was already up, sweaty, exhausted, and with red eyes. He had spent the entire night reciting lines, recording his own voice, studying every pause, every inflection. The fear was still there, but now it came with anger, determination, hunger. He stood in front of the mirror and hit play on a cassette tape. His own voice played back a monologue from Malcolm X. He repeated it, line by line, until the words stopped being just words and became truth. You won't be born great. You'll become great. One day at a time. One mistake at a time. It was as if each word buried the weak Denzel deeper and carved out the Denzel who was being reborn. Warfare training. Denzel built a brutal routine. Woke up at 5 a.m., ran for 40 minutes in the biting cold. Came back. Cold shower. Then spent hours locked in with theater scripts, acting books, recordings of cinema masters. He didn't just want to learn how to act. He wanted to master the craft. Break it. Rebuild it. Breathe through it. He sought inspiration where others saw nothing. He watched old films dozens of times, pausing on every expression from Marlon Brando, every silence from Sidney Poitier. He wrote his lines out by hand, rehearsed gestures in the mirror. He became his own lab, his own general. His friends started to notice. He declined parties, turned down distractions, even rejected low-paying gigs that would pull him off course. Most said, "You're losing yourself." But he knew he was finding himself, clashing with the system. Months later, Denzel went to another audition. It was for a smaller play, but directed by a respected figure in African-American theater. When he walked in, the director seemed to recognize him vaguely. Seemed to remember the kid who had once been humiliated. Back to try again? Denzel didn't answer. He just asked, "Give me 2 minutes." Just 2. The director hesitated, then nodded. When Denzel began to speak, the room changed. This wasn't acting. It was raw truth. Pain, rage, love, fear. It all poured out like lava from a volcano that had been held back too long. When he finished, there was silence again. But this time, no one dared to laugh. The spark becomes fire. The director stood up and simply said, "You're not ready, but you're coming." It was the first validation. The first spark that touched something flammable inside Denzel. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone else anymore. He needed to prove it to himself. And that was everything. From that fire, a flame was born that would never go out. Denzel was forging not just an actor, but a force no one could ever ignore. Time passed like a runaway train. The harsh winter gave way to New York's blooming spring, but inside Denzel Washington, it was still cold. Not the cold of giving up, but the sharp, cutting cold of discipline. He was still an actor with no name, no resume, no party invitations. But now he had something more valuable than all of that. Truth. And truth, sooner or later, finds its light. It was a gray Tuesday when he went with a friend to an audition for a small play at an alternative theater in Brooklyn. Denzel wasn't on the list. He was just there out of loyalty. But the casting director, a woman with wild white hair and razor-sharp eyes, noticed him sitting quietly in the corner. "You an actor too?" she asked, skeptical. Denzel hesitated for a moment, then answered with steady confidence. "I am. You've got 5 minutes. Show me something." He had nothing prepared. No memorized script. No rehearsed scene. All he had was himself, and the hundreds of hours he'd spent locked away, working. He took a breath, closed his eyes, and began an improvised monologue. Something born of pain, memory, life. He spoke of a boy who watched his father walk out, who grew up trying to be strong for his mother, who swallowed the world in silence until it exploded into art. When he opened his eyes, the director's eyes were wet with tears. She clapped once, expressionless, and said, "You're in the cast. Don't even need your name." The theater had only 80 seats. The chairs creaked, the ceiling leaked, and the costumes were hand-me-downs from the 80s. But when Denzel stepped onto that stage for the first time, something shifted. As if the universe finally paused and said, "Now it's your turn." The play was a modern tragedy about racism and forgiveness. Denzel played a young man falsely accused of a crime, and his performance was so raw, so visceral, that during one performance, an elderly woman in the audience fainted, overcome with emotion. Outside the theater, the whispers began. "Who is that kid? I've never seen someone that intense. He's going to blow up. It's just a matter of time." Denzel heard it all in silence. But inside, something began to beat louder. It wasn't ego. It was certainty. Certainty that whatever he had, no one could dim it. 2 weeks into the show's run, a man came to watch. He sat quietly in the third row. Lawrence Newman, a producer for a major Manhattan talent agency, a hunter of raw gems. And that night, he found gold. After the show, he approached Denzel backstage. "Washington, right?" "Yes, sir. I've got a screen test for a supporting role in an indie film. Nothing big, but can you do something on camera?" Denzel said yes. The test was 2 days away. A shot, a leap, a promise.
And he was ready.
The environment was nothing like theater. Cameras, harsh lights, a cold silence. But Denzel stood tall. He picked up the script. It was a scene between two brothers, one a drug addict, the other a cop. He played both roles. No cuts, no prep. When it ended, the crew was frozen. The director looked at him and said, "We were going to go with someone else, but it would be stupid to let you slip away." The role was his. First film, first screen, first real shot. Shooting began weeks later. Denzel gave it everything. But it wasn't all easy. During the third week of filming, one of the producers tried to push him into a racial stereotype during a scene. Try to make it more, urban. A little more street. Denzel froze, looked the man dead in the eyes and said, "If you want a stereotype, hire a cartoon. I'm an actor, not a mold." The set went silent. Later, the director pulled Denzel aside, embarrassed, and whispered, "You may have just ended your career." Or, "I just saved it," he replied. And he wasn't fired. In fact, word of that moment spread through industry circles. He's young but bold. He doesn't back down. He carries himself like a leading man. Months later, the film screened at a small festival in Chicago. Critics loved it. But no one expected the call that came to Denzel's Harlem apartment one rainy afternoon. "Mr. Washington, this is Warner Brothers. We have a director who'd like to meet you." "Who's the director?" "Norman Jewison. He wants to discuss a new project called A Soldier Story." Denzel went silent. This was real. He thanked them, hung up, and sat on the edge of his bed, eyes full. For the first time in a long while, he cried. But not from pain. He cried because it had all been worth it. In the darkness of tiny stages and secondhand cameras, the light had finally found him. And there was no turning it off. The red carpet stretched out like a line of fate. It was the official New York premiere night of A Soldier Story. Spotlights cut through the dark sky. Cameras flashed like modern lightning, and celebrities paraded by with perfectly rehearsed smiles. At the center of it all stood one man, Denzel Washington. He wore a tailored black suit. His posture was firm, his smile restrained, but inside his heart raced. Not from fear, from memory. Just a few blocks away, years earlier, he had been humiliated, rejected, disdained. Now, that same Bronx kid was walking the red carpet of the elite. The reunion. During the post-premiere reception, a crowd of critics, agents, and journalists mingled among champagne glasses and applause. But one face stood out. Aged but unmistakable, the veteran casting judge who had humiliated him years ago. The man approached hesitantly. Denzel saw him from afar, recognized him immediately, but showed no surprise. "Denzel, do you remember me?" "Never forgot," He replied with a cold smile. The man laughed, embarrassed.
I was wrong about you.
Very wrong. You are brilliant. Denzel took a small sip from his glass and answered calmly. I was brilliant that day, too. You just didn't see it. The silence between them weighed heavier than any speech. No arrogance, no need for offense. The revenge was complete. Not with shouts, but with glory. The press, the critics, and the impact. The next day, newspapers carried headlines. Denzel Washington, a contained hurricane on screen. A new acting force emerges. He doesn't act, he lives his characters. Critics who once barely glanced at him now called him a revelation, emotional powerhouse, the rightful heir of true cinema. But Denzel knew the truth. He wasn't discovered. He was built, stone by stone, defeat by defeat. The conversation with his mother. 2 days later, he returned to the Bronx. No security, no press, just himself. The same subway, the same hallway of the building where he grew up, the same smell of food and real life. He knocked on the door of the small apartment. His mother, Lennis, opened it with the smile of someone who always knew. They embraced for a long moment. I saw you on TV, she said, her eyes full of pride. It wasn't easy, he replied. She held his face in both hands, just like when he was a boy. Nothing great comes easy, my son. But you made your name a shout of resistance.
He smiled, moved.
Mom, thank you for never doubting. Not even when I did. The bigger call. Weeks later, he received a call from Spike Lee. A new project. A role that would change everything. Better Blues. And then, Malcolm X. It was as if the universe was now opening doors that were once locked. But he didn't rush. He walked steadily. Because now he knew, it's not about arriving fast. It's about arriving true. The soul in silence. In an interview with a prestigious magazine, they asked, what was your greatest revenge? He thought for a few seconds and answered, it wasn't about proving anything. It was about no longer needing to prove anything. Everything I did was to not break. And those who survive hell with their soul intact don't need to shout victory. They breathe. And that's enough. From that stage of humiliation, an altar was born. And where once there were laughs of scorn, now there was silence of reverence. Denzel Washington didn't ask for respect. He earned it. The stage was empty, but the light still shone upon it. It was a rehearsal room, silent, where it all began, and where nothing ever truly ends. Denzel Washington walked in slowly, took a deep breath, and sat down in the chair he used when he was a young, unknown actor. He looked into the mirror in front of him, seeing not just his reflection, but an entire story of struggle, falls, and victories. More than fame, a mission. Now celebrated, awarded, one of the greatest actors of his generation, Denzel knew the true role he carried went far beyond the cameras. It was a commitment to truth, to courage, to those who never had a voice. He created programs to support young Black actors, opened doors for new talents, and gave speeches that echoed like cries of resistance and hope. On one such occasion, he said, it doesn't matter how many times you fall, but how many times you get back up. And most importantly, how many you help to rise with you.
The reunion with the boy from the past.
In an exclusive interview, a reporter asked, Denzel, looking back, what would you say to that young man who was humiliated and doubted? He smiled, eyes moist, and answered, I'd say, you're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone dim your light. He speaks for himself, and for everyone who believes their dreams are worth fighting for. The hardest moment. But the path wasn't only applause. There were nights when the silence was deafening, when the fear of not being good enough almost paralyzed him. In his autobiography, he confessed, the greatest battle was with myself. The fear of not being enough, the doubt that ate away inside. But the strength came from faith. Faith in talent, faith in discipline, faith in the love that art gave me. The legacy that remains. Decades later, at the height of his career, Denzel saw the arrival of a new generation, young actors, Black, Indigenous, women, who saw in him a living inspiration, proof that art can be redemption and revolution. At a ceremony where he received an honorary Oscar, he spoke to an emotional audience. "This award is not mine. It belongs to all those who fought and still fight to be seen and heard. Breaking barriers is building bridges. And I am just one stone in that bridge, a firm, unbreakable stone." The cycle complete. The final scene of this story is not in Hollywood, nor on red carpets, but in the shining eyes of young people who now know that humiliation is not the end. That effort turns pain into strength. That dedication shapes raw talent. That hope defeats fear. Denzel Washington is not just an actor. He is a symbol of resistance, an example of overcoming, and a legacy that will never be forgotten. And so ends the journey of the boy who was once humiliated, but rose up a giant. Because those who have courage, talent, and heart don't just shine. They light the way for all who come after.